The grumpy keeper of Seabreeze Light. Silas Blackwood lived and breathed the lighthouse's pulse. A chamois buffed the Fresnel lens, his frosty breath clouding the lantern room. Confounded modern frippery, he grumbled, not about the lamp, a Victorian marvel, but the proposed solar array intended to bolster its power. He spat on his rag, scrubbing a speck with undue force. Bolster, they claim. Supplant, more likely. The coppery tang of brass mingled with the sharp bite of the sea, an aroma he'd known for half a century. He tweaked the wick, the flame flared, a defiant spark against the approaching twilight. Meanwhile, at Seabreeze Town Hall, Mayor Thomas Thompson punctuated his thoughts with pen taps against the mahogany table. Figures don't fib, he declared, adjusting his glasses. While, picturesque, the lighthouse consumes an exorbitant amount. Blackwood uses nearly triple the energy of an automated system. Councilwoman Davies, a champion of the pragmatic, offered a curt nod. And the upkeep? Endless repairs to a relic. It's a financial drain, Mr. Mayor. A youthful councilman, eager to prove his worth, chimed in. Perhaps Mr. Blackwood might entertain retirement. The mayor sighed, a heavy sound. There's the rub, isn't it? He's been keeper for Harold. Harold, the clerk, rustled papers. 48 years, Mr. Mayor. 48 years, Thompson echoed, a note of weariness in his tone. An institution. A legend, some would argue. But legends don't settle accounts. We need a strategy. Later, Maya Petrova ascended the lighthouse's spiral staircase, her boots striking a steady rhythm in the echoing tower. The briny air thickened, the lamp's rhythmic surge swelling with each upward turn. She found Silas on the lantern room's external gallery, cloaked in thick wool, his gaze fixed on the restless ocean. Evening, Silas, she greeted, her voice thin against the wind's bluster. He turned, a fleeting smile softening the weathered contours of his face. Maya. Come to indulge an old man's yarns, have you? Invariably, she replied, joining him at the railing. Waves hammered the rocks below, erupting in plumes of froth. What tale graces us tonight? Silas peered at the horizon, his eyes tracing a distant fishing vessel. Tonight, I recount the time I beheld a kraken. Maya's eyes widened in surprise. A genuine kraken. As genuine as the brine stinging your cheeks, he said, a mischievous glint in his eye. He began his saga, depicting the immense creature with limbs thick as ship masts and eyes like molten embers. Maya listened, spellbound, her mind conjuring images of the fabled monster. As Silas wove his narrative, the gale shrieked, and the lamp's beam swept across the storm-tossed water. For Maya, the lighthouse transcended its function as a guide. It was a haven, a realm where stories lived, and where the taciturn keeper held the key to a fantastical domain. She wondered if the council grasped this, or if they only saw numbers and obsolete machinery. A plan for progress. Mayor Thompson cleared his throat, the mahogany of the council table gleaming under the harsh fluorescent lights of the Seabreeze Town Hall. He adjusted his tie, a nervous habit he'd never quite shaken. As you all know, he began, his voice amplified by the microphone, the lighthouse has been a topic of discussion for some time now. A murmur rippled through the room. Councilman Davies, a retired accountant with a penchant for spreadsheets, steepled his fingers. Councilwoman Rodriguez, ever the pragmatist, leaned forward, her expression unreadable. The costs associated with maintaining the lighthouse, specifically Silas's salary and the upkeep of the aging structure, are becoming increasingly burdensome for the town budget. Thompson paused, letting his words sink in. Therefore, I propose we consider automating the lighthouse. A modern system would be significantly more cost-effective in the long run, requiring minimal maintenance and eliminating the need for a full-time keeper. Davies practically vibrated with enthusiasm. Mr. Mayor, I've run the numbers. The savings would be substantial. We could reallocate those funds to much-needed infrastructure improvements. He produced a thick report, its pages filled with columns of figures. Rodriguez remained impassive. What about Silas? She asked, her voice cutting through Davies's excited rambling. He's been a fixture in Seabreeze for decades. Of course, we would offer him a generous severance package, Thompson assured her, a forced smile plastered on his face. And we could even explore options for him within the town, perhaps in a consulting role regarding the lighthouse's history. The discussion continued, a dry, clinical analysis of Silas's worth measured solely in dollars and cents. The whirring of the ventilation system seemed to mock the warmth and character Silas brought to the lonely sentinel. Unbeknownst to the council, Maya stood just outside the door, hidden in the alcove by the water fountain. She had been on her way to the bakery, craving Mrs. Olson's sourdough, when she'd heard Thompson's voice. Curiosity had drawn her closer, and now, she wished she'd stayed away. Each word felt like a punch to the gut. Automated? Silas replaced by a machine? The thought was absurd, almost sacrilegious. The lighthouse wasn't just a navigational tool, it was a living, breathing part of Seabreeze, and Silas was its heart. She gripped the cold stone of the wall, her knuckles white. The mayor's promises of severance and consulting roles rang hollow. Silas belonged in the lighthouse, sharing his stories, not shuffling papers in some town office. Tears welled in her eyes, blurring the already indistinct patterns of the linoleum floor. She could almost hear Silas's voice, the rumble of his laughter, the cadence of his tales. The image of the automated system, cold and impersonal, replacing him was unbearable. She stumbled back, away from the door, her chest tight with a mixture of anger and despair. The aroma of freshly baked bread, which had moments ago been so enticing, now seemed cloying and artificial. The salt spray of the ocean, usually a comforting presence, now felt like a stinging reminder of the sea that Silas loved. She had to do something. She didn't know what, but she couldn't stand by and watch Silas be cast aside like an obsolete piece of equipment. The lighthouse, Silas, Seabreeze, they were all worth fighting for. As she backed away, she bumped into a metal garbage can, sending it clattering against the wall. A hush fell over the room. Maya froze, her heart pounding in her ears, as Mayor Thompson's voice called out, "Who's there?" "Saving Silas." The aroma of salt and brine usually invigorated Maya, but this morning, it tasted like impending doom. She marched towards Mrs. Gable's bakery, the scent of blueberry muffins doing little to lift her spirits. Inside, the usual morning crowd buzzed, a symphony of gossip and caffeine. "Morning, Maya," chirped Mrs. Gable, her flour-dusted hands already kneading dough. "The usual." "Not today, Mrs. Gable," Maya said, forcing a smile. "I need to talk to everyone. It's about Silas." A hush fell over the bakery. Silas was a fixture like the lighthouse itself. A comfortable, unchanging presence. "What's wrong with Silas?" asked old Mr. Abernathy, his voice raspy. "The town council is talking about automating the lighthouse," Maya announced, her voice shaking slightly. "Replacing Silas with a machine." A murmur rippled through the room. Mrs. Gable paused, her hands hovering over the dough. "Automate? But Silas, he's been there forever." "Exactly." Maya pressed on, emboldened by the initial reaction. "He's the heart of the lighthouse. His stories, his knowledge, you can't replace that with gears and wires." "But Mayor Thompson says it will save us money," countered Martha, the librarian, ever practical. "Lower taxes are a good thing, Maya." "At what cost?" Maya pleaded. "What about Silas's job? What about the character of Seabreeze?" The door chimed, and Mayor Thompson strolled in, a picture of civic duty in his tailored suit. "Morning, everyone," he boomed, his voice instantly commanding attention. "Just checking in, seeing how my constituents are doing." He caught Maya's eye and a thin smile stretched across his face. "Ah, Maya. I see you're discussing the lighthouse." "Yes, Mr. Mayor," Maya said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'm trying to explain why Silas is irreplaceable." "Irreplaceable is a strong word, Maya," the mayor said smoothly, picking up a blueberry muffin. "Progress is inevitable. Automation will free up funds for much-needed infrastructure improvements. New sidewalks, a better school, think of the possibilities." He paused, taking a bite of the muffin. And of course, lower taxes. Who wouldn't want that? A chorus of agreement rippled through the bakery. Even Mrs. Gable seemed to waver. Martha nodded, her eyes gleaming at the prospect of a new library wing. But what about Silas? Maya persisted, her voice almost lost in the murmur. The mayor sighed, a picture of patient understanding. Silas will be taken care of course. We'll find him a suitable position. He didn't specify what that position might be. Dejected, Maya left the bakery, the sweet scent now cloying and oppressive. She tried rallying support at the hardware store, then the post office, but the refrain was the same: lower taxes, progress, inevitable change. The mayor's words had taken root, spreading like a creeping vine through the town. She walked towards the lighthouse, the familiar red and white stripes a stark contrast to the grayness settling in her heart. The gulls cried overhead, their call sounding like mocking laughter. She had to save Silas, somehow. But against the promise of progress, what could she possibly do? The salty wind whipped around her, carrying the faintest whisper of Silas's stories, a reminder of what she was fighting for. A dimming light. The clatter of boots on the metal stairs usually went unnoticed by Silas, a familiar rhythm woven into the fabric of his days. But today, each footfall was a hammer blow against his resolve. He'd been polishing the lens, a task he performed thousands of times, yet his hands felt clumsy, his movements uncertain. He strained to hear the voices drifting up from the landing below, snippets snatched by the wind whistling through the tower's vents. Automation. Efficiency. It was Councillor Thorne, his voice clipped and officious, a sound that grated on Silas's nerves like barnacles scraping against the hull of a ship. Blackwood. Resisting change. That was Mrs. Abernathy, the harbourmaster's wife, her tone laced with a saccharine sweetness that fooled no one. He knew she'd always considered him an old relic, a barrier to progress. Silas's grip tightened on the polishing cloth, the familiar scent of brass cleaner stinging his nostrils. He'd dedicated his life to this light. 40 years he'd stood watch, guiding ships through treacherous waters, his vigilance a beacon of safety in the darkest storms. He remembered his father, his weathered hands teaching him the intricate workings of the Fresnel lens, the importance of unwavering dedication. A lightkeeper's duty, he'd said, his voice a low rumble, is to the sea and all who sail upon it. Now, it seemed, his duty was obsolete. He slumped against the cold metal frame of the lens, the gleaming glass reflecting his own weary face back at him. The lines etched around his eyes seemed deeper, the silver in his hair more prominent. He felt a profound sense of displacement, as if the very ground beneath his feet was shifting. Where would he go? What would he do? He was a keeper of the light, not a salesman, not a politician, just a simple man with a simple purpose, now deemed unnecessary. The sun was beginning its descent, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. Usually, Silas would be meticulously checking the lamp, ensuring its beam was sharp and true, ready to pierce the gathering gloom. Tonight, however, he found himself lingering, his gaze fixed on the horizon, lost in a sea of melancholy. He ran a hand over the smooth, cool surface of the lens, a silent farewell to the giant eye that had been his constant companion. The rhythmic pulse of the lamp, usually a comforting heartbeat, now felt like a mocking reminder of his impending obsolescence. He knew he should clean the bird droppings that had accumulated on the exterior of the lantern room glass. The gulls had been particularly active today. But the task seemed insurmountable, a symbol of the larger task of maintaining his position. He shuffled down the winding stairs, the familiar creak of the metal echoing in the empty tower. The light still shone, but within Silas Blackwood, a dimming light mirrored the setting sun. A promise to remember. The wind, sharp with brine, keened around the lighthouse, a mournful counterpoint to the jaunty shanty Silas once favoured. Maya discovered him on the exposed gallery, neglecting the lamp's upkeep, his gaze lost in the roiling expanse. His shoulders sagged, the once brilliant sapphire of his eyes now appeared faded, mirroring the leaden sky. Silas, she ventured, drawing closer. He offered a slow, spiritless nod, acknowledging her presence without surprise. Didn't hear you approach, lass. These aging ears aren't what they were. A manufactured smile flickered across his face, devoid of its usual warmth. "Everything all right? You seem low-spirited." He sighed, the sound thick with surrender. "Low-spirited? That's one way of putting it. Superfluous springs to mind too. Like this old tower, I expect. Made redundant by something newer, more efficient." He gestured vaguely toward the automated beacon blinking on the mainland. "They have no need of me now, Maya." Maya settled beside him, the cold stone seeping through her clothes. "That's not the truth. The town still needs you. For your tales, your guidance. Tales are mere yarns, child. They won't prevent ships from running aground." "And guidance? Of what use is wisdom when progress rolls right over you?" He raked a hand across his deeply etched face, a map of sun and storm. "They'll soon forget me. Just another old codger, gone." Her chest constricted. This vital, enchanting man, brought so low by despair. "That won't happen, Silas. I won't permit it." He gave a hollow chuckle. "And what can you do, little wren, against such a powerful force?" "I don't know yet," she conceded, "but I'll contrive something. We'll devise a plan. We must show them, remind them, of all you've contributed, everything you signify to this town." Silas shook his head, yet a pinprick of something, hope, perhaps, ignited in his gaze. "It's too late, Maya. The decision is already made." "Then we'll sway their thinking," she declared, her tone resolute. "What capabilities do you possess that the town could still employ?" She pressed, her mind already formulating possibilities. "Navigation? Weather forecasting? Not work? Give me everything." He paused, then began to enumerate skills honed over decades. "Well, I know the currents like the lines on my palm. Can foretell a coming squall hours before the instruments register a change. I can repair nets faster than anyone in port, and I know every sandbar and inlet for 50 nautical miles." As he spoke, his posture improved, the spark in his gaze intensified. Maya listened with focused intensity, scribbling in her notepad. "Okay, good. This is good stuff. We need to frame this, Silas. We must make them understand that you're not just some relic clinging to a defunct lighthouse. We need to find some way to demonstrate your worth." She chewed her lip, considering. "Perhaps a demonstration? A competition? Something that highlights your abilities, something they can't dismiss." The wind appeared to lessen its fury, and the faintest ray of sunshine sliced through the cloud cover, illuminating Silas's face. A hesitant smile played on his lips. "A contest, you say? Now that's a notion. Hidden treasures." The air in Silas's living quarters hung heavy with a maritime tang and the musty scent of aged paper. Maya's movements were deliberate, her fingertips tracing the time-worn surfaces of the furniture. The room spoke of a life pared down to essentials. A narrow bed, draped with a sun-bleached quilt, stood against one wall. Opposite, a small wooden table overflowed with charts and navigational instruments, hinting at a life spent charting courses. An armchair, perfectly positioned to capture the endless horizon, completed the Spartan arrangement. She began with the dresser, its drawers protesting with a chorus of creaks at each pull. Within, neatly arranged stacks of clothing, primarily thick wool sweaters and sturdy trousers, bespoke practicality and resilience against the elements. Tucked beneath the garments, a tarnished silver locket caught her eye. At her touch, it sprang open, revealing a miniature portrait of a woman whose kind gaze radiated warmth. Silas's wife, perhaps? Or a beloved sister? A sudden stab of guilt pierced her as she considered the intrusion. Replacing the locket, she moved to the bookshelves lining the wall. Far from the pulp novels she'd anticipated, they housed well-thumbed volumes on navigation, maritime history, and the intricacies of engineering. Interspersed among the books, a collection of photographs beckoned. Sepia-toned images depicted young men in uniform, their expressions earnest and firm. Group shots on ship decks, individual portraits set against exotic foreign vistas. A younger, slimmer Silas, crowned with a thick manet of dark hair, stood proudly among them. In one particular shot, he sported an unfamiliar uniform, bedecked with ribbons and medals unknown to her. Then, she noticed it, a small, locked cabinet built low into the wall, nearly obscured by a stack of charts. Unlike the other personal effects, this felt intentionally secreted away, igniting her curiosity. Her fingers danced along the edges, searching for a hidden spring or latch. Finding none, she tested the lock's sturdiness. Frustration mounting, she gave a sharper tug, but the mechanism remained stubbornly fixed. A solution was needed. Recalling the toolbox in the shed, she darted outside, snatched a small screwdriver, and returned to the room, her pulse quickening with a blend of anticipation and unease. Kneeling before the cabinet, she carefully worked the screwdriver into the lock. A gentle turn, then a satisfying click, and the door swung inward. Inside, nestled on faded velvet, lay a collection of medals. Bronze, silver, and gold, each adorned with intricate patterns and ribbons of vibrant hues. Below them, a folded document, its paper brittle and yellowed with age. Unfurling it with care, she revealed a citation. The word swam at first, then coalesced into clarity. Silas Blackwood. Distinguished Service Cross. Awarded for extraordinary heroism in action. The citation recounted a daring rescue during a brutal naval engagement, an act of valor that had saved countless lives. Maya stood transfixed, her mind reeling. This was not the reticent old lighthouse keeper spinning salty yarns. This was a war hero, a man of unimaginable bravery. Why the concealment? Why the silence about his past? The weight of the medals in her hand felt immense, a tangible link to a life she never suspected existed. Everything had just shifted on its axis. A hero's tale. A long afternoon cast ochre bars across the lighthouse room through the glass panes. Silas dozed in his armchair, an abandoned teacup growing tepid beside him. Restless, Maya gravitated toward the bookshelf tucked into a corner. Not overflowing, its contents hinted at a rich past, navigational charts, ornithological studies, battered classics. Wedged between a hefty tome on celestial mechanics and a collection of shanties, a framed document caught her eye. Her curiosity ignited, she drew it out gently. A commendation, official and crisp, yet faded with age. United States Coast Guard Award for Gallantry, the heading declared. Her breath hitched. Silas? Gallantry? The script detailed a rescue during a tempest. A crippled freighter, caught in a hurricane's fury, was foundering, its crew facing imminent demise. Silas, a young officer then, had led a small team through towering waves and blinding squalls to the imperiled vessel. The citation lauded his unflinching resolve and peerless skill at sea against impossible odds. He'd orchestrated the evacuation, ensuring every soul escaped before the freighter succumbed to the ocean's ravenous maw. Maya absorbed the words, the image of the weathered lighthouse keeper transmuting into a vision of a youthful, dauntless figure wrestling the elements. She pictured him, drenched and resolute, battling the tempestuous sea, his orders a clarion call above the wind's shriek and the waves' deafening crash, shepherding his crew and the desperate sailors to safety. A scene worthy of cinema, yet vividly real. This was Silas. Replacing the citation, her fingers brushed against something else, a small, velvet-lined case. Inside, resting on aged satin, lay 3 medals. A bronze star, a commendation medal, and a third, smaller and dulled with time, unfamiliar. Each represented a saga, a moment of courage, a life preserved. The magnitude of her prior judgments weighed upon her. She had perceived Silas as a solitary relic, tethered to a forgotten place. She had condescended to pity him. Now, a new perspective dawned. He was more than a beacon's guardian, he was a keeper of secrets, a hushed hero. Silas shifted, his eyelids lifting. He blinked, focusing on Maya. "Find something of interest, did you?" he inquired, his voice gravelly. Maya swiftly shut the case and returned it to the shelf, her pulse quickening. "Just browsing," she managed, struggling to steady her tone. "This place is intriguing." A low chuckle rumbled in his chest. "It has its moments." He seemed oblivious to her discomposure. Another cup of tea. As she watched him amble toward the kettle, a swell of respect, laced with a pang of guilt, washed over her. A newcomer in his domain, she was only glimpsing the depths of the man she thought she understood. Outside, the wind howled, a familiar refrain to Silas, a constant echo of the sea he'd challenged and the lives he'd salvaged. The town meeting interrupted. The murmur of discontent rippled through the Seabreeze town hall like a rising tide. Mayor Thompson, a man whose jowls quivered with indignation, adjusted his tie. All those in favor of discontinuing funding for the Seabreeze Lighthouse signify by saying aye. A chorus of ayes, some hesitant, some surprisingly forceful, filled the room. Maya Petrova, heart hammering against her ribs, could hear the vote tallying in her head, each eye a hammer blow against Silas's future. She was late. Desperately late. Rummaging through Silas's trunk had taken longer than she anticipated. The weight of the small, velvet box in her pocket felt like a lead weight dragging her down. All those opposed? Thompson's voice boomed, impatient. Maya burst through the heavy oak doors, nearly knocking over Mrs. Gable, whose mouth pursed into a prune of disapproval. "Stop," she yelled, her voice echoing in the sudden silence. Every head swiveled. Mayor Thompson's face flushed an alarming shade of puce. "Young lady! This is a formal proceeding. You can't just barge in here like this." Maya ignored him, her gaze sweeping across the room, locking on skeptical faces, worried faces, faces that had listened to Silas's stories and now were poised to throw him aside. "You can't do this. You don't know who Silas truly is." "I think we know exactly who he is," Thompson sputtered. "An old man, clinging to a useless lighthouse, draining town resources." Maya marched to the front, ignoring Thompson's sputtering protests. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the velvet box. Snapping it open, she revealed 3 gleaming medals, each pinned to a faded ribbon. A collective gasp swept through the room. "These belong to Silas. He never told me about them, but I found them. These aren't just trinkets, Mr. Mayor. These are medals of honor." She pulled a creased, official-looking document from her bag. "This," she announced, her voice trembling slightly but gaining strength, "is Silas Blackwood's citation from the Coastal Guard." She began to read, her voice ringing clear in the hushed room. For extraordinary heroism and unwavering courage in the face of extreme danger, the citation detailed a daring rescue during a violent storm decades ago, a rescue that saved the lives of a stranded fishing vessel's crew. It spoke of Silas's selflessness, his bravery, his refusal to abandon hope even when faced with impossible odds. As she read, the atmosphere in the room shifted. The skepticism on faces softened, replaced by a mixture of surprise and shame. Mrs. Gable's prune-like mouth relaxed. Even Mayor Thompson seemed momentarily stunned, his jowls ceasing their quivering. Maya finished reading, the silence that followed was profound. She looked around the room, meeting the gaze of each person present. "He didn't tell you. He didn't want the attention. But this town, this lighthouse. It means everything to him. It's more than just a job, it's a part of him. He deserves your respect, not your dismissal." The weight of the medals in her hand felt different now, lighter somehow. The air crackled with unspoken questions, with a dawning realization that they had almost made a terrible mistake. The vote, thankfully, had not been finalized. Mayor Thompson cleared his throat, the puce receding from his face, replaced by a nervous pallor. "Well, I wasn't aware. A light still shines." The room was thick with anticipation, the air heavy enough to taste. Mayor Thompson cleared his throat, the sound amplified by the strained silence. He looked from Maya, her chin held high, to the blueprint spread across the table, then finally settled his gaze on the council members. "All right," he began, his voice a carefully constructed bridge between practicality and sentiment. "We've heard Miss Petrova's compelling arguments, and frankly, the data speaks for itself. The proposed upgrades, while significant, offer a substantial return on investment. Lower energy bills, reduced maintenance, it's fiscally responsible." A murmur rippled through the room. However, the mayor continued, raising a hand, we also understand the value, the history, that Silas Blackwood represents. We can't simply discard that. He paused, letting his words sink in. Therefore, I propose a compromise. We proceed with the lighthouse modernization, but Silas remains involved. He will serve as a consultant during the transition, ensuring the integrity of the historical structure is maintained. More importantly, he will continue to be our storyteller, sharing the tales of sea breeze, keeping the legends alive. The room erupted in a low buzz of conversation. Maya felt a surge of hope, tempered with caution. It wasn't a complete victory, but it was a start. The following day, the mayor, accompanied by Maya, visited Silas at the lighthouse. The old man, usually a stoic figure, seemed genuinely touched by the proposal. He ran a gnarled hand over the lens, its facets reflecting the morning sun in a dazzling display. Consultant, he chuckled, a low rumble in his chest. Never thought I'd see the day. And storyteller, Silas, Maya added, her voice soft but firm. Your stories are important. They connect us to our past, to each other. Silas looked at her, his eyes, usually clouded with a distant sadness, now shone with a spark of something akin to pride. All right, lass, he said, a hint of a smile playing on his lips. I'll do it. But I'll need an apprentice. Someone to learn the ropes, to carry on the traditions. He looked pointedly at Maya. And so it began. Maya became Silas's apprentice, spending hours at the lighthouse, learning the intricacies of the Fresnel lens, the nuances of weather forecasting, and the art of navigation. Silas, in turn, shared his stories, tales of daring rescues, treacherous storms, and the unwavering spirit of the sea. He showed her the logbooks, filled with entries written in elegant cursive, each entry a tiny snapshot of Seabreeze history. The town, initially skeptical of Maya's fervent advocacy, began to see Silas in a new light. He wasn't just an old man clinging to the past, he was a guardian of their heritage, a link to their identity. Children would gather at the base of the lighthouse, listening wide-eyed as Silas recounted tales of pirates and shipwrecks. Tourists flocked to Seabreeze, eager to hear the stories firsthand. The lighthouse, modernized yet still steeped in history, became a symbol of Seabreeze's resilience, its ability to embrace progress while honoring its past. And Silas, his light shining both literally and figuratively, continued to guide ships through treacherous waters and inspire the town with his unwavering spirit. The war hero, once an afterthought, was now revered and cherished. He was home.